The following program is intended for educational, informational, and documentary purposes. This episode is based on publicly available court records, archival reporting, historical sources, and criminological analysis. Some scenes, presentation elements, and narrative sequencing have been reconstructed for clarity and continuity. Every effort has been made to accurately represent events based on the material available at the time of production. Any opinions expressed are for analytical purposes only and do not constitute legal advice or formal allegations. All individuals are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. This program contains discussions of real-world violence and mature subject matter. Listener discretion is advised. Nearly 10 years, Australia became obsessed with the murder of a woman nobody could identify. A young woman discovered near Albury in 1934, partially burned, shot in the neck, wearing distinctive yellow silk pajamas. Her body preserved for display inside a tank of formalin while investigators desperately searched for answers. Then finally, in 1944, police announced a breakthrough. The Pyjama Girl, they claimed, was a missing Sydney woman named Linda Agostini, and her husband, Antonio Agostini, had confessed to killing her. To the public, the mystery was finally over. But history would eventually ask a terrifying question. What if police solved the wrong crime? Antonio Agostini's confession appeared to provide investigators with everything they had been missing for a decade. A motive, a timeline, a killer. According to police, Antonio admitted that he and Linda had an argument and he violently shot her in the back of the head in their Sydney home years earlier. Accounts differ slightly depending on newspaper reports and surviving court records, but the core story remained the same. Antonio claimed the shooting was accidental. During the argument, a firearm discharged. Linda was struck in the neck. Terrified of consequences, Antonio panicked. Instead of reporting the death, he wrapped her body, drove south towards Albury, and abandoned her near the roadside before attempting to burn the remains. On paper, it sounded plausible. Domestic homicide was not uncommon, and criminologists know that concealment after an impulsive killing often reflects panic rather than long-term planning. But almost immediately, cracks began to appear in the story. Some details conflicted with forensic evidence. Others conflicted with witness statements. And one enormous question remained. Why had Antonio confessed after all these years? Modern criminologists studying historical interrogations point to several possibilities. In the 1940s, police questioning methods were aggressive by modern standards. Suspects had fewer legal protections. Interviews were rarely recorded. Psychological pressure was common. And Antonio occupied an especially vulnerable position in Australian society. He was an Italian immigrant during the Second World War. At the time, Italians in Australia faced suspicion, surveillance, and discrimination. That context matters, because modern researchers have questioned whether Antonio's confession was entirely voluntary, or whether investigators unintentionally shaped his story into something that fit the existing narrative. False confessions are often misunderstood. Most people imagine an innocent suspect would never admit to a serious crime. But research shows confessions can merge under enormous psychological pressure, especially when investigators repeatedly insist they already know the truth. Suspects become exhausted, Suspects believe cooperation may reduce punishment, or other suspects fear broader consequences beyond the case itself. That does not necessarily mean that Antonio was innocent, but it does mean confessions alone are not always reliable. And in this case, the confession may have mattered more to investigators than the evidence itself. The trial of Antonio Agostini became one of the most sensational criminal proceedings in Australia during the 1940s. After a decade of headlines, speculation, and public obsession, newspapers framed the case as the final chapter of the Pyjama Girl mystery. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse. Journalists packed the galleries. For many Australians, Antonio had already been convicted in the court of public opinion before proceedings had even begun. Prosecutors argued that Antonio killed Linda during a domestic violence dispute, transported her body to rural New South Wales, and attempted to destroy evidence through a fire. The confession became the centerpiece of the case, but the defense pushed back hard. Antonio's lawyers argued there had been no deliberate murder. Instead, they claimed the shooting occurred accidentally during an argument, a tragedy, a panic-driven cover-up, not premeditated homicide. And then came the inconsistencies. The witness timeline didn't always align. Descriptions of Linda varied. Questions emerged regarding the identification procedures. Even some forensic details appeared uncertain. Yet by this stage, momentum mattered. The public wanted closure, police wanted resolution, and the newspapers wanted an ending. Institutional pressure can shape investigations in subtle ways. The longer the high-profile case remains unsolved, the greater the pressure on the authorities to produce certainty. Eventually, solving the case can become psychologically and politically more important than questioning whether the solution is completely correct. And that pressure can unintentionally narrow investigative thinking. Alternative explanations began disappearing. Contradictions became minimized. Ambiguities get reframed as minor details instead of warning signs. And in many historical cases, the confession becomes the lens through which all evidence is interpreted. Ultimately, Antonio Agostini was not convicted of murder. Instead, the court found him guilty of manslaughter. He received a sentence of 6 years imprisonment. Later, after serving his sentence, he was deported to Italy. Officially, the Pyjama Girl mystery was solved. But unofficially, doubts never fully disappear. Decades passed. The story slowly faded into the Australian criminal folklore. But eventually, historians, journalists, and forensic researchers reopened the files, and what they found raised disturbing new questions. The biggest issue was the identification itself. Was the preserved body truly Linda Agostini? Modern researchers noted several inconsistencies. Linda reportedly had a distinctive Roman nose, but photographs and descriptions of the Pyjama Girl appear to show a straighter nose profile. Official records also conflicted regarding eye colour. Dental comparisons, considered persuasive in the 1940s, may not have been as definitive as officially claimed. And some witnesses who knew Linda reportedly expressed uncertainty. Now, to be fair, historical identification is complicated. Bodies change after death. Preservation chemicals alter appearance. Fire damage distorts tissue, and photographs from the era were often poor quality. But collectively, the inconsistencies created serious doubt. Enough doubt that some researchers now believe the Pyjama Girl may have never been properly identified at all. And if that's true, then the implications become staggering. Because Antonio Agostini may indeed have caused Linda's death, but the body found near Albury may have belonged to somebody else entirely. Which raises another possibility. Did police effectively merge two separate mysteries together? One, the disappearance of Linda Agostini, and two, the murder of the unidentified Pyjama Girl. Investigators call this narrative convergence. When multiple unresolved events begin overlapping, authorities sometimes connect them into a single explanation that appears emotionally satisfying. Especially in historical cases where forensic certainty is limited. Once a narrative becomes accepted publicly, revising it becomes extremely difficult. Because institutions rarely like reopening unsolved cases, and the public rarely likes hearing that certainty may have become an illusion. Today, the Pyjama Girl remains one of Australia's most haunting criminal mysteries, officially solved, yet permanently uncertain. Some researchers still believe the identification was correct. Others remain convinced police closed the case too quickly. And then there is the most unsettling possibility of all, that somewhere in Australia's forgotten history, there existed another woman, another victim, someone whose disappearance was never reported, someone whose family never found answers. A woman reduced to nicknames by newspapers and displayed publicly inside a glass tank for nearly a decade. Not remembered for who she was, only for what happened to her. If the Pyjama Girl was truly Linda Agostini, the case represents one of the strangest homicidal investigations. But if she wasn't, then the real mystery was never solved at all. Because somewhere beyond the headlines, beyond the confession, beyond the courtroom, the real identity of the Pyjama Girl still remains unknown. And perhaps that's why the story is still so unsettling, nearly a century later. Not because it ends with certainty, but because it doesn't. You've been listening to Criminology Files. Producing these deep dives takes significant time and research. If you find value in our work, please take a moment to subscribe and leave us a review. For case updates and behind-the-scene content, follow us on Instagram at Criminology Files. We'll see you next week. Good night.